Hello and welcome back to another of my YouTube videos. So I thought this video I would talk about book reviewing. So if you didn't know, for like over 3 years I used to write a review of every single book that I read over on my blog. Up until about a month ago I did this, as I said, for every single book I read. But I recently stopped doing this because it was kind of taking away the fun of blogging. So I enjoy writing, I enjoy the idea of getting my opinions out there, but I was reading sometimes 2, maybe even 3 books in a week and then having to write a 600-700 page or word even review of that, stick it on my blog, and people would then go read it and be like, okay, brilliant. Or I'd get like 3 views on it and it'd be really demoralizing. It just felt like it was a complete, I don't know, not a complete waste of my time, but it just felt like it was wasting my time. So I didn't want blogging for me to become a place where I felt like I had to do it. I wanted to do it. I wanted to get my opinions out there. So I stopped doing book reviews. But over the time that I did it, I wrote over 200 book reviews. That means there are over 200 reviews. You can go read on my website now if you want to go find yourself a new book, which is just lukeharkness.com, so make sure to go check that out if you want to. And I will still be blogging about things, including a written version of this topic that I'm going to be talking to you about today. But what I thought I'd do is I thought I'd give you 10 tips if you're looking to do reviews. Now, they don't necessarily have to be written reviews. They could be on here, they could be on YouTube, or they could be over on TikTok or Instagram, or wherever you want to do video reviews, or written, or Substack, or wherever you do book reviews. I've done over 200, so I thought I would give you some tips that I've picked up. Now, caveat, I'm not pretending I'm the best book reviewer in the world. I'm not pretending I know exactly what people want to know, or that I get it down and nailed every single time. No, not a chance. In fact, I would say I'm quite a flawed book reviewer. I literally just write my review down and then post it. I often don't really go back and read it. What I'll often do is I'll save it, go create the graphics, or I used to create the graphics, come back and Grammarly would be like, oh, by the way, a whole load of this doesn't make sense, and everything's red. And by red, I mean none of the words made sense. So that would be my basic proofing. But other than that, it would basically be a instant review from my thoughts that I'd written down. Sometimes I'd literally write it in my notes app whilst walking on my lunch break at work. But so I'm saying I'm not perfect, so don't take this as the only thing you should be reading. But I'm going to give you 10 tips now coming up that I think have helped me formulate reviews. Sometimes I think when you're writing a review or producing a review like this, people kind of get a bit brain numb. They sit there and they think, I don't really know what to talk about. I know I liked the book, or I know I didn't like the book, but I don't know what I really didn't like about the book or what I did like about the book. So I thought, as I said, what I'd do is I'd get together a list of things that I like to think of when I'm doing my book reviews to try and help me understand what I liked about it and therefore articulate what I liked or disliked about a book. So let's get into it. Okay, so I think one of the first things you should consider when you're writing out your book review or talking about your book review, I'm going to say writing quite a lot because that was how I did book reviews for a while. So just allow yourself to think that's video or whatever, however you do your book reviews. But is your emotional response to the book. Now, you might not be a very emotive person. I'm not. I'm not somebody who has ever cried at a book. I often, very rarely cry at films. In fact, I've probably maybe cried at a film once. And even then, when I say cry, it's like a little like welling up. So I'm not a particularly emotional person, but I do feel the emotions. I do feel sadness, and I do feel anger, and I do feel happiness, and I do smile when I'm reading books and things like this. So one of the big things you should definitely consider when you're writing a review or recording a review is making sure that you consider your emotional impact and consider what other people might get from that emotional impact. So might they come out of the book being angry? Might they come out of the book thinking, no, that's not for me? Or might they come out of the book sad? Now, some of the best books that have ever been written have a range of emotions in them. They'll make you cry, they'll make you laugh, they'll make you love, they'll make you hate, and all of this sort of stuff in them. So I think that's the first thing I would consider when you're doing a review for your book is what was your emotional attachment? What other emotions might people feel when they're reading that book as well? So the next one is, were the characters actually any good? Did they have personalities? This is a big one for me. This is huge. This literally can define whether I like a book or not. One of the big things for me in a book is I need a character to feel authentic. I need to make sure that they have either a sense of humor or they have some sort of story arc where they go from villain to hero or hero to villain. I need them to make mistakes and have flaws and sometimes lose their temper, but also have someone very specific that they love and would do anything for. But I can't deal with these characters that are just perfect, that are morally incorrupt, that is that a word? That are morally perfect. I can't deal with people that are also just always villainous and they do things all the time that make you cringe, and I don't know, that's a big thing for me. So consider the personalities of the characters that you're reading about. For me, sometimes, as I said, that can define a book for me. I've read books that are 600-700 pages long that just focused around one kind of person. Yes, there were other characters that came in, but because that one person was such a fleshed out, well-written character, they, as I said, they kind of lost their temper every now and then, but they loved and they lost and they cried and they had great moments, but they had sad moments and they had opinions that they stuck to. That made the book incredible. And sometimes I've also read books where there's a wealth of characters and none of them were great, so I didn't bother liking any of them, and it was a big shame because maybe the plot was brilliant, but because the characters were so bang average, it brought the kind of review score down, as it were. So consider your characters. So the next one is kind of, as I said, plot. So tip 3 is, did the plot keep you engaged? Now, the big thing when it comes to plot is people are like, but what is plot? What is plot? Well, there's a combination of things that contain the plot that are plot. I said plot there a lot. Basically, what you're looking at here is you're looking at the story. You're looking at the moments where the action happens, or the characters have conversation, or anything else happens that moves along the story. With the plot, what you'll often find is there is different pacing, which I'm going to talk about as my next tip, and that's kind of, I'm going to talk about pacing. But with the plot, you're essentially looking at engaging. Now, this will be different kind of for everybody. This will be different depending on what your interests are. I, for one, love just kind of fast-paced. Everything's all about action. Don't need to worry too much about kind of world building. I want to learn all of my kind of information straight from the story itself. Now, Brandon Sanderson is one of the best at doing this, I feel anyway. Brandon Sanderson allows you to kind of get engaged with the history, the lore, the story, just by doing the story. There's rarely any moments in a Brandon Sanderson book where I'm like, you could have left that bit out, that bit wasn't relevant, that bit wasn't that particularly interesting. Everything in a Brandon Sanderson book is brilliant, which is why, even though his kind of The Way of the Kings and his Stormlight Archive series, all of the books are over 1,000 pages long, it's still engaging. And that's why plot is really, really important for people, and to make sure that there's interesting things going on. Were the characters interesting, as I talked about earlier? Were there actual moments where you're like, yes, this is sick, I'm loving this, I'm really interested in this? That's what you need to think about with your plot. And then this brings me on to my 4th tip, which is pacing. And this is very close to plot. So with plot, it's like, how much quantity was there? Was there a decent amount of things that happened? When you came out of that book where you're like, oh my God, that happened, that happened, that happened, that happened, that happened. With pacing, you need to think about kind of like this. So essentially, with pacing, you can have kind of different paces in books, and people enjoy different levels of pacing. So pacing is essentially, okay, so there's loads of action happening and then nothing happens. And what I mean by nothing is, I don't know, maybe the characters talk for a bit in a room, there's 2 of them. The conversation's obviously engaging, it doesn't move along the plot, it doesn't discuss anything else going on in the world. It's just 2 people talking for the sake of talking. That might be quite slow pacing. A lot of different genres will do different ways of doing pacing. I'm going to say pacing a lot now because I can't think of another word for it. But essentially, if you've got a thriller, you will have quite fast pacing. The whole book will be bang, this happens, bang, that happens, this shock, this twist, this amazing moment, this discovery. And then sometimes your longer books, such as your fantasy books, that can sometimes be, as I said, up to 6, 7, 8, 9, 1,000, hundreds, 1,000 pages long, will often have quite a varied pacing. So what this could be is there'll be a big battle where everything's happening, 2 or 3 characters die, loads of action, you can't stop flipping the pages, everything's going so quickly, and then all of a sudden they're in a war room or something, they're just talking about the politics, they're talking about what's happened in the battle, everything's simmered down, everything's calmed, and that's difference in pacing. So you've got to consider when you're writing your review or recording your review whether the pacing, you enjoyed it, whether other people might enjoy it. One of the big things people often say is that things start off slow in a book, and sometimes if you're introduced into a brand new fantasy, they'll either do it one of 2 ways. They'll be like, bam, you're straight in a battle and things are really exciting, here's the world, or they'll go, bam, let's introduce you to things, let's get you introduced to some of the characters and their conversations and whether they like each other and don't like each other and the world that's happening. So we'll see if that's something that, so pacing is a big thing there when that comes to that. So that's what pacing is. Consider it. Is it good? Did you like it? Was it too slow? Was it too fast? Was there not enough variety? Do you not like variety? Again, Writing a book review, it's your opinion, so don't worry too much about other people. So the next one is a big thing, and one that I don't want you to worry about too much if it's not your thing. So one big thing that's going on kind of on TikTok at the moment is something called intellectualism, which is essentially people looking down on people that aren't necessarily as good at articulating their thoughts on books. Don't worry too much about this. You don't have to have an English degree to write a book review. You don't have to have an English degree to write a good book review. So therefore, when I'm saying look for a book that has good writing, or whether the writing is good even in the book that you've read, don't worry too much about it, because it's all fairly subjective. Yes, there are critically people that will say, I've done a law degree, an English degree, and I'm amazing at writing, and this book was written amazingly because it used long words and fantastic prose, and it was like poetry. But there also may just be a thriller that you said was written really well because you just literally flew through it, because there wasn't anything that was copied, there wasn't anything that was cringy or one-liners that were used, it was just brilliantly written. There may also be a book you read where what you're actually reading about is particularly interesting, but the way that it's written is so beautiful. The prose that they're using, the way that they're making the sentences flow is so engaging that you're actually really interested in this rather maybe dull part of plot because of how well it's written. So something to consider, but as I said, don't worry too much if you're not somebody who knows what good writing is or what bad writing is. Some quick tips, as I said, when considering what makes good and bad writing, is things are copied sometimes in books. That might be bad editing, but sometimes it's just bad writing. So things are kind of repeated rather than copied, I mean. Sometimes what you'll have instead is you'll have moments where there's cringy dialogue, there's cringy one-liners, there's cringy engagement in that sense, and that can sometimes put you off from the writing as well. You've got to remember these are real people, and I'm going to go more into that later as well. So that's one of the things I'd maybe considered writing about, is the writing style and whether it was any good or not. So my sixth tip when you're writing your book review or talking about your book review, I'm going to keep bringing that up, aren't I, was the dialogue any good between the characters? So we talked just earlier about characters and whether they were actually believable, but the dialogue between characters is a big thing for me as well. So yes, a character needs to have a sense of humor maybe, or it needs to have a story, they need to have a story arc, or they need to be interesting and depth, they need to make flaws, but the dialogue that they actually have with each other is so important. Now, there are some kind of cheaper, easier thrillers to read where I think the dialogue is quite cringy sometimes. They say things that aren't believable. They say things that people don't actually say in real life. They say things that you only ever hear in like American horror films from like the 1990s, this sort of thing. So they're things to consider in the dialogue. You've also got to consider, are they using contractions? So contractions are, if I was to have a conversation with somebody, I wouldn't say, we are going to the shops. I'd say, we're going to the shops. Or I'd say, we're off to the shops. Do you know what? Just the way that they say things in their dialogue, you need to think, is it realistic? Is this person writing too formally? Now, sometimes someone's style might be quite formal. Just realised I've got biscuit down my top. That's going to be in the rest of the video. But sometimes, as I was saying, there's going to be too much formality in the writing, and sometimes that can put people off. I know that it's quite the case with some fantasy books. Some people think, because it's like, sometimes they're kind of medieval. The fantasy is very medieval quite often the times. Kings, queens, courts, lands, this sort of stuff. Therefore, the writing can be quite formal, as I said, and that kind of puts people off. But consider, if you're reading a thriller, you're considering reading a contemporary book, is the dialogue actually believable? That's something to consider as well. So then you're coming to the end of your book review and you're thinking, okay, I need to start wrapping up. And you're thinking about, did the end have an impact? So tip 7 is, was the ending satisfying? Now for me, there have been numerous times where the first, 60, 70% pages of a book weren't particularly interesting for me. And then I went ahead and finished it. I got those last 100, 200 pages done, and the whole book changed for me. The whole book was a completely different story for me. Things rounded up, twists happened, characters finally hit their arc. Everything started to revolve. So what you've got to think is, are people going to be reading this book and getting 60, 70, maybe not quite as far, but % of the way through and thinking this isn't a great book? You need to let them know, no, it's worth sticking it out because the ending's fantastic. You also need to consider, if they're not somebody that likes to try and get that far through a book, just to get to the ending, maybe don't bother. But sometimes the ending for me, as I said, is fantastic. And more often than not, the ending is the best part of a book. It's the bit with the most amount of action. It's the bit where everything kind of resolves. It's the bit where the baddie gets revealed or killed and the goodie wins or doesn't win. Sometimes there's cliffhangers. Sometimes in fantasy books it builds off to something bigger. So you've been reading for 600 pages about this one thing, and then, I don't know, in the last 100 pages, it's like, oh, did you know there's a much bigger thing going on out here that we're going to focus on in the next book? So the ending of a book, for me, is so important, and sometimes literally defines a book. And sometimes I'll read a book that people have said is amazing, thinking for the first 40-50%, this is so bang average, nothing's happening. And then the last 50% is amazing. I'm like, now I know why everybody said it was good, because those are people that like the second halves of books. So worth considering. So that's tip 7. So tip 8 is then considering, and we're going into a different bit of a theme here with these next kind of few points as well, is who might enjoy the book. So when you're writing your summary, or you're writing the final kind of bit of your review where you've talked about what you liked, what you didn't like, given your opinions on it, you then need to consider, who is this book for? And the easy kind of couple of things you can do here is make a similar book suggestion. So kind of, if you liked X book, you will like this book. Or if you like X, X, and X, this is a combination of those books. That's a really easy thing to do when considering who might like the book. Alternatively, what you can do is you can say, if you just like science fiction, or if you just like fast-paced books, or if you just like lots of plot or short books, or if you like this author, you might like this book. And that's a really easy way to kind of just allow people to almost feel like they're getting a personalized experience of your review. So they can then read this book review, and you may be sitting there saying it's fantastic, but you give them this little section at the end and say, if you like such and such, you'll like this book. Or if you don't like such and such, you may not like this book. That gives them a better understanding of whether your positive book review is actually a book they would enjoy reading. So that's a great way of kind of ending a book review and giving a bit of additional support in your summary, as it were, to people that may be wanting to read the book and know if it's for them or not. Something else to consider, though, is the underlying themes that have happened throughout the book. Now, one of the early things you want to consider when you're reviewing the book is the trigger warnings you may need to warn people about. Now, I'm not a big trigger warning person because I don't know a lot about them. I haven't researched them. I wanted to keep my book reviews quite easy, quite plain. But as more people start to bring it up, I do just start to mention some of these trigger warnings. So if you want to be somebody that puts trigger warnings in them, do that at the start so people are aware before they start reading the review, because sometimes the review can trigger people. But in terms of themes as well, sometimes there might be themes about racism or sexism or inclusion, diversity, or anything like political or bigger things like this. But there also may be some really niche themes in there. So, I don't know, about friendship, or about growing up, or about that age between being a child and being an adult where you don't know what you're doing, these sort of things. These are definitely worth considering putting into your review, because again, the people reading your book reviews are going to be looking for a book that relates to them, a book that they're going to enjoy. So if you can say, this is a book about growing up, this is a book about that age in between, I don't know, 25 and 30, where you're not sure whether you're a proper adult, you don't feel comfortable yet, you still feel like you need your parents sometimes, this sort of stuff. Like I did with my Emily Henry review on my TikTok, there may be some people in that age group that think, oh, this is a book for me now. This sounds like a book for me. So consider themes like that when you're writing or recording your book review, because they're things that I think people do also want to understand when they're reading a book. What's the theme here? What's the idea? What's the message, as Keith Lemon used to say? So yeah, think about what the underlying theme is. And then very finally, my 10th and final tip is consider why your opinion may differ from others. Now, this is my biggest one and one of the hardest things to do when you're writing a book review. The point of a book review is it's your opinion. Yes, your opinion may be an opinion that massive amount of people also agree with. Sometimes things you consider are unanimously good, but what you've also got to consider is somebody may not enjoy this. Now, I often think this more with games. Games are, yes, there's great games. You've got your Elden Rings, your hard games like this, which are unanimously, very obviously on social media and on review sites given very positive reviews, because as a game, they're great. For me, who hates hard games, hate it. 1 out of 10, don't like it. Consider that with your book review as well. Consider why you may have loved the book, but why, if you don't like this and you don't like that, people may not enjoy it. So that's a big thing to consider, and something you put in your summary as well, and kind of harkens back to what I said earlier, where it says, if you did like this and you do like this, you might like this, but consider if you don't like this, you might not like this, and that's absolutely fine. And your review should never sound factual. You're not giving somebody a fact. It is not fact that this is a good book. It is not fact that this is a bad book. You are not telling an author that they are an awful writer. You're not telling an author they'll never write a good book. All you're doing is you're saying, in my opinion, I didn't like this. And it's as simple as that. And you need to kind of make that obvious when you're doing your book review as well. And I try and do that when I do my book reviews. I think I get that across because I get quite a few comments every now and then that do say, fair book review, fair points, appreciate it, like that. And when you kind of get comments or responses as well, try not to be defensive of any of the comments that come in. Remember, people are coming in, and sometimes, yeah, people are overly aggressive about stuff because they're still young, they're still immature into how they're going to kind of give their opinion on things. But in general, don't try and bait it. Don't try and follow up with it. Just make sure that your opinion is an opinion, and therefore others are allowed to have theirs as well. And consider why other people might have different opinions. So there you have it. There are my 10 quick tips. I say quick, this video is over 20 minutes long. Review tips when you're writing your book review. That was awfully said. So I'm a book reviewer and I still can't speak. That's why I'm writing, is it gives me loads of chances to actually write what I meant to say. But let me know if any of those tips helped you. Let me know if you are a book reviewer. Let me know if you just watch my book reviews or other people's book reviews and you want to know whether they are good book reviewers. But one of the things I want you to know is these are 10 tips I just randomly picked. It isn't you have to cover all 10 of these to be a good book reviewer. It's more if you're struggling for things to fill out your book review. I don't know, you've got a 2-3 minute video, like I can't put this online, this is really short. There's some other things to consider. Or maybe you're a book reviewer who's been doing it for ages and you think, am I covering things people want to talk about? Is there something else I could be covering in my book reviews? These may have helped you as well. But let me know if there's anything I've missed. Let me know if there's anything you like to read or watch in your book reviews that other people could pick up down in the comments below. What do you like to see when you're reading a book? What's the one thing when you're reading a book review you think, I need them to tell me this before I can decide whether it's a book for me or not? So let me know in the comments down below. But until the next video, thanks for watching. Keep reading all the time. Let me know what you're reading as well. Always love to hear what you're reading. Don't forget to subscribe as well. If you've not yet subscribed, I'm trying to work my way towards 1,000. If you're on YouTube, you know why it's 1,000. If you've not watched any of my other videos, make sure you go check out every other video I've watched, recorded. I have actually watched them as well, but I meant recorded. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.